Today we're going to be learning about what happens during specific shifts or changes in the production possibilities curve and how to address potential free response questions. So in question number 1, it wants us to draw what happens to the production possibility curve when an economy uses its resources inefficiently. Now, the first thing that you might think of when an economy is using its resource inefficiently is that the curve would shift down, right? Because inefficiency inherently signals that our production is going to be lower. However, this is actually not the case. And the reason why is because it's called a production possibilities curve. Notice how it has the keyword possibilities. Basically, this curve, treat it like a constant in this scenario. Because if you look at the question, it's asking what happens when the economy uses its resources inefficiently. It's not saying that it has a lack of resources, it's just saying that it's using its resources inefficiently. So technically, the possibility of the production in the economy is still at this curve. It's just that they're not using it effectively. The only time the curve would actually shift downward is if they let's for example, they lost resources, right? Then it would shift downward. But in this case, what happens is you move the point here inward in the center. And that's all you have to do. Just describe this change. So we're going to number 2. It wants us to know what happens when capital good production increases in the long term, so the PPC. So if you look at the PPC, the capital goods represents the x-axis and consumer goods represents the y-axis. And so basically, when you have an increase of capital goods, obviously the line moves here, but it even increases the amount of consumer goods. A lot of people make the mistake of just drawing the line like this, to where it only increases capital goods. But remember, this is not only is it asking in the long term, but when you can increase your capital and the amount of capital goods that you can produce, it inherently translates back onto the amount of consumer goods that are produced. Because capital and consumer is directly related, so it represents economic growth. And so when you're drawing the PPC curve, you draw a shift outward. So knowing the last 2 questions, especially number 1, I want you to answer whether or not the level of output possible based on the current PPC. So is the level of output possible based on the current PPC? So as you can see, we're producing at a point over here. And I want you to think about it. So basically the answer is no. And the reason why is because, remember, the production possibilities curve is representing the possibilities of the current production as like a base. So this is like the highest amount it can go, right? Like in this question, it doesn't tell us that the economy gained resources or something, or gained capital. It simply tells us, is this level possible? And no, because this is the limit. The PPC always represents the limit. PPC represents limit. Always remember this. Anytime you encounter a question, don't get confused by its wording. Always assume it's the limit of the PPC, and the only time it will shift is when something changes in resources, or if there's like a natural disaster that destroys the amount of resources and such. This is just asking in a theoretical sense. And that's the kind of a logic that you need to answer economics questions, not just related to the PPC, but like in general.